The city was awake, lights shining from tall glass towers, but one office on the highest floor was colder than the rest. Inside that office sat a man whose name carried both power and fear. His name was Adrian Cole. People called him a king of business, a man who had built an empire with nothing but his mind and his iron will. But behind the polished walls of his success, there was no warmth. Adrian was a man who believed in control. To him, emotions were weakness. Love, compassion, kindness, these words had no place in his dictionary. From the moment he stepped into his office every morning, his life was like a machine. His assistants walked quickly, his managers never dared to argue, and his workers feared the sound of his footsteps. He was respected, yes, but not loved. He came from nothing. His childhood had been full of hunger and rejection. He had learned early that the world was not kind. To survive, he built walls around his heart, walls made of money, success, and rules. Over the years, those walls grew higher and stronger until nobody could reach him. He became a symbol of victory in business, but also a symbol of loneliness in life. Inside the office, silence ruled. Adrian sat at his massive desk, signing papers with quick strokes of his pen. His phone buzzed, screens lit up with numbers, meetings waited for his command. But none of it touched his heart. To him, people were tools, and relationships were just transactions. The empire he built was not for love, it was for survival. Every morning, his employees greeted him with forced smiles. Their eyes carried fear, not admiration. They respected his genius but whispered about his cruelty when he was not around. He never laughed. He never celebrated birthdays. Even at company parties, his presence felt like winter, cold and distant. Numbers don't lie, he often said. And people can't be trusted. This belief had made him rich. But it also made him lonely. At night, when the city went quiet, he sat in his penthouse staring out of the window. He told himself he didn't need anyone. He told himself love was for fools. Yet, sometimes, in the silence of his empty home, his heart felt heavier than all the wealth he owned. Still, Adrian refused to change. He reminded himself that emotions had destroyed his father, that kindness had left his mother broken, and that love was nothing but a weakness. So, he stayed strong, cold, untouchable. But fate does not knock loudly. Sometimes, it enters softly, in the smallest moments, through the smallest doors. And that morning, fate entered Adrian's empire. It began like any other day. Adrian walked into the office with his usual sharp suit, his assistant trailing behind with files. Meetings were scheduled, deals awaited signatures, and deadlines hung like swords over his employees. Everyone was tense, careful not to make mistakes. But in the corner of the room, quietly arranging documents, was someone new. She was an intern, her presence barely noticed by the others. She was not dressed in power suits, nor did she wear the mask of fear. Her eyes were calm, her movements gentle, and her silence was different, softer than the silence that filled the office. Adrian's gaze fell on her for a brief moment. He did not care about interns. To him, they were temporary shadows, learning nothing, contributing little. But something about this one made his eyes pause. He quickly turned away, reminding himself that he had no time for such distractions. Yet, that single glance was enough. It was the first crack in the wall he had spent years building around his heart. He didn't know it then, but his empire, cold, silent, and untouchable, was about to change forever. Because sometimes, it does not take power to break an empire. Sometimes, it takes only one person. And sometimes, that person is the one you least expect. The morning sun lit the glass walls of Gray Enterprises. Inside, the office was busy as usual. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people walking fast with files in hand. But that day, the air felt different. Whispers moved from one desk to another, carrying the same piece of news. The new intern is here. Every employee reacted the same way, shaking their heads, sighing, some even laughing softly. To them, an intern in this company was nothing more than a small candle in a storm. especially with a CEO like Alexander Gray, who could freeze anyone with a single glance. At the reception, she stood quietly, holding a small bag and a folder with her documents. Her name was Emily Carter. She was young, fresh out of university, and her eyes carried a mix of nervousness and hope. She looked around at the tall ceilings, the shining floors, the fast-paced workers, and for a moment, she felt small. But Emily had promised herself something before coming here. No matter how cold the place, I will not give up. The HR manager greeted her politely, though with a little pity in her smile. Welcome, Emily. Let me show you your desk. As they walked through the office, Emily noticed the way people stared at her. Some offered weak smiles, others shook their heads. She even heard a whisper as she passed. Poor girl. She doesn't know what she's stepping into. Emily pretended not to hear. She kept her steps steady, her face calm. Inside, her heart was racing, but she refused to let fear win. Her desk was small, near the large glass window that gave a perfect view of the city. It was neat, almost too neat, as if no one had touched it for years. She placed her bag down and looked around. The HR manager leaned closer and whispered, "One piece of advice, don't get too close to the CEO. He doesn't like small talk. Do your work quietly, and you'll survive." Emily nodded, though something about that warning made her curious. Why is everyone so afraid of him? By mid-morning, she was given her first set of tasks. Nothing too big, arranging files, typing reports, checking schedules. She worked quietly, focused, but she kept noticing the strange silence whenever the CEO's name was mentioned. The employees spoke his name like a shadow, careful not to say too much. At lunch, Emily joined the cafeteria. She carried her tray and sat at an empty table. Within minutes, 2 other interns joined her. They seemed friendly, but even they could not resist giving her a warning. You're new, right? You'll see for yourself soon. See what? Emily asked softly. The CEO. He's heartless. Don't expect kindness, don't expect a smile. Just stay invisible. Why does everyone say that? She asked. One of them leaned closer, whispering as if afraid someone might hear. Because it's true. Last month, an employee asked for leave to attend her brother's wedding. He told her, "Work is your only family here." She quit the next day. Emily stayed quiet, her fork frozen in her hand. She could see fear in their eyes. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Curiosity. Is he really like that? Or is there something people don't see? The day passed slowly. Emily finished her tasks and prepared to leave. Just then, her manager walked over. Tomorrow, you'll meet the CEO. He likes to personally review new interns. Her heart skipped a beat. Personally? Yes. Don't say too much. Answer only what he asks. And don't expect him to be friendly. That night, Emily lay awake in her small apartment. The city lights blinked through her window, but she could not relax. Tomorrow, she would face the man everyone feared. She thought of the stories, the warnings, the cold image of Alexander Gray. But deep inside, a voice whispered to her, "What if he is not what they say?" The next morning, she arrived early. The office was still half empty, the silence heavy. She arranged her desk neatly, double-checked her files, and kept glancing at the elevator doors. When they opened, he stepped out. Alexander Gray. He walked past rows of desks, his presence commanding silence. Employees lowered their heads, pretending to work harder. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen powerful people before, but there was something different about him. His face was sharp, his eyes cold, his steps firm. He looked like a man made of stone. For a second, his eyes moved across the office, and landed on her. Emily felt the weight of that glance. It was sharp, heavy, almost like a test. But instead of looking away, she offered a small, polite smile. To her surprise, his eyes lingered for a moment longer before he walked away. The office buzzed again, whispers rushing like waves. Did she just smile at him? She's crazy. Nobody does that. She won't last a day. Emily sat quietly, pretending not to hear. Her hands trembled slightly, but inside, she felt something strange, like she had just stepped into a story far bigger than herself. Tomorrow, she would enter his office for the first time. And tomorrow, the real story would begin. Adrian Cole had always believed his life was built on unshakable rules. Power was everything. Trust no one. Show no weakness. These were the pillars of his empire, the pillars that had carried him from nothing to everything. But lately, those pillars no longer felt solid. Something inside him was shifting, though he refused to admit it. It began with distraction. During meetings, when managers presented numbers and plans, Adrian found his focus wandering. His sharp mind, usually quick to catch every detail, drifted toward thoughts he could not explain. He caught himself glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to enter. And more often than not, it was the quiet figure of Maya that appeared in his thoughts. He told himself it was nothing. She was only an intern, one among many. But her presence had left an impression. The memory of her calm eyes, the way she spoke without fear, the way she worked without demanding recognition. These small details began to echo inside him. For years, Adrian had kept his heart locked behind walls of steel. No one was allowed in. Even when he looked in the mirror, he did not see the boy he once was, lonely, unwanted, and scarred. He only saw the empire he had built. But now, cracks were forming in those walls. And through those cracks, memories began to slip. One night, after a long day, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse. The city lights flickered below, but he did not see them. His thoughts wandered back to his childhood. He remembered the small apartment where he grew up, the sound of his parents fighting, the nights when there was no food on the table. He remembered his father's betrayal, walking away from the family and never returning. He remembered the silence of his mother's tears. Adrian had promised himself, as a child, that he would never be weak like them. He would never need anyone. He would never let love destroy him. And he kept that promise. He built walls so strong that nothing could touch him. But now, after years of silence, a stranger's simple kindness had brought those memories back. The next morning at the office, Adrian tried to bury his thoughts in work. Numbers, contracts, deals, these had always been his armor. But when he passed Maya's desk, he felt something stir again. She looked up briefly, offering him a small nod of respect before returning to her papers. It was such a small gesture, yet it unsettled him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt uncertain. Why did her presence disturb his balance? Why did he care if she stayed late, or helped others, or worked silently in the background? This was not him. He was supposed to be untouchable. That afternoon, while reviewing a presentation, Adrian noticed a mistake. The manager froze, expecting his anger. But before Adrian could speak, Maya quietly stepped forward with corrected slides she had prepared as backup. Adrian stared at her. "You expected this error?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I noticed the data didn't match yesterday," Maya replied calmly. "I thought it might be needed." The room fell silent. Everyone watched, waiting for Adrian's reaction. Usually, he crushed people with his words when they failed. But this time, he said nothing. His eyes stayed on Maya for a moment too long before he finally dismissed the meeting. When he returned to his office, Adrian felt something he had not felt in years: gratitude. But gratitude was dangerous. Gratitude meant weakness. He clenched his fists, reminding himself of his rules. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, he could not erase the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was someone in his empire who wasn't afraid of him. That night, as rain fell against the windows of his penthouse, Adrian poured himself a glass of whiskey. He stared at the city below, thinking of the walls he had built. He thought of the empire that looked so strong from the outside but felt hollow from within. And he thought of Maya, the silent intern, who had unknowingly placed the first crack in those walls. He told himself it was nothing. Just a distraction. Just a passing moment. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The walls he had spent his whole life building were no longer unbreakable. And once walls begin to crack, they never stop. Storms never announced their arrival in Adrian's world, they simply struck without warning. And one such storm came on a Thursday morning. Adrian entered the boardroom as usual, his steps heavy, his eyes sharp. The long table was filled with directors, managers, and advisors. But the atmosphere felt strange, tense. Whispers circled the room. Documents were shuffled nervously. Adrian could sense it, something was wrong. He sat down, opening the report placed in front of him. His eyes scanned the numbers, and then he stopped. His jaw tightened. Something was missing, millions of dollars unaccounted for. His empire had been bleeding money silently, and the betrayal was hidden in the fine print. Who authorized this? Adrian's voice was low, but it carried the weight of thunder. The room froze. Finally, one of the directors cleared his throat. "Sir, it seems to be linked to Mr. Harris, your most trusted partner." For a moment, silence crushed the room. Mr. Harris, the man who had stood by Adrian for 10 years, the one he trusted more than anyone, was accused of betrayal. Adrian's eyes darkened. His empire had always been built on rules, on control, on loyalty through fear. And now, his closest ally had cut into its very foundation. Panic spread quickly among the managers. Some whispered about resigning before the empire collapsed. Others argued in hushed tones. But amid the chaos, one person remained steady. Maya. She sat quietly at the far end of the table, her files neatly arranged, her eyes focused. While others drowned in fear, her calmness seemed almost out of place. Adrian noticed it, though he did not show it. After dismissing the meeting with cold authority, Adrian locked himself in his office. His mind raced. For the first time in years, doubt crept in. If Harris could betray him, who else might be plotting in the shadows? The empire he had spent years building suddenly felt fragile. Late that evening, as most employees rushed home, Adrian stayed in his office, staring at the pile of contracts. His chest felt heavy, his head burned with questions. And then, he heard a soft knock. The door opened slowly, and Maya stepped inside. She held a folder in her hands. "I think you should see this," she said quietly. Adrian raised an eyebrow. He didn't like interruptions, especially now. But her voice carried no fear, only certainty. She placed the folder on his desk. Inside were spreadsheets, cross-checked reports, and emails she had traced. Evidence of Harris's betrayal, clear and undeniable. Adrian looked up at her, suspicious. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain?" Maya met his gaze calmly. "It's not about gain. This company, it's more than just numbers. People here depend on it. If it falls, many lives will break. I thought you should know the truth." Her words struck him like a hidden arrow. 4 years, no one had spoken to him that way. Not with fear, not with greed, but with sincerity. He wanted to question her further, to search for hidden motives, but her steady eyes made him pause. For the next few days, Adrian worked closely with her, examining every detail, rebuilding the case against Harris. And in those long hours, something unusual happened. For the first time, Adrian allowed someone to stand beside him, not as a servant, not as a tool, but as a partner. When the truth finally came out, Adrian confronted Harris. The betrayal was deeper than he imagined, but thanks to Maya's careful work, Adrian managed to protect his empire from complete collapse. Harris was gone, and order was restored. But victory felt different this time. Adrian had not won alone. And that unsettled him. That night, as he stood by his office window, watching the city lights, Adrian thought of Maya's calm face, her unwavering dedication. In his world, trust was dangerous. Yet, for the first time, he felt the faint pull of it, like a rope thrown across the walls of his fortress. Could he really trust her? Or was this another trap, cleverly hidden behind gentle eyes? He clenched his fists, torn between suspicion and something far more dangerous. Hope. Because if Maya was truly different, then the empire he had built on fear might not survive. But perhaps, just perhaps, it could transform into something greater. And that possibility scared Adrian more than betrayal ever had. The storm had passed, but the empire was not the same. Adrian had removed Harris, tightened the system, and restored stability. To the outside world, he looked stronger than ever. Investors praised him, employees whispered about his brilliance, and the company continued to rise. But inside, Adrian felt different. Something in him had shifted. For the first time, he had allowed someone, an intern no less, to stand beside him in his darkest hour. And she had not betrayed him. Maya. Her name echoed in his mind more often now. He told himself it was nothing, only gratitude. But deep inside, he knew it was more. Gratitude was temporary, but this feeling lingered. It followed him into late nights, into empty hallways, into the silence of his penthouse. One evening, as the office emptied out, Adrian noticed Maya still at her desk. Her face glowed faintly in the light of the computer screen. The others rushed home, eager to escape the weight of work, but she remained, steady and calm, as always. Adrian walked over. "You're still here," he said, his voice softer than usual. She looked up, a small smile touching her lips. "There's still work to be done." "You're not paid for this," he replied. "Some things are not about pay," she answered simply. For a moment, Adrian stood there, uncertain. Those words were dangerous to him. He had built a life where everything had a price. Yet here she was, reminding him that not everything could be bought. That night, something strange happened. Instead of leaving her alone, Adrian stayed. He sat at the desk across from her, and together they worked. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sound of typing and the rustle of papers. Yet the silence was not cold, not heavy like before. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, Adrian felt human again. He even found himself laughing softly at a mistake he made, a number typed in the wrong column. Maya looked up, surprised. She had never heard him laugh before. And when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. But peace never lasted long in Adrian's world. The very next day, he received news that shook him. His private investigator, hired long ago to check backgrounds of employees, delivered a file. And inside it was Maya's name. Adrian read every page carefully. His chest tightened as the truth unfolded. Maya was not just an ordinary intern. She had once worked for a small company that collapsed because of one of Adrian's ruthless acquisitions. Her family had suffered because of his empire. Adrian's hands trembled as he closed the file. Betrayal. That word burned in his mind again. Was she here for revenge? Was everything she did a lie? The walls he thought were cracking suddenly threatened to collapse completely. The next time he saw her, he could not hide the storm in his eyes. She noticed it immediately. "Something is wrong," she said softly. Adrian placed the file on his desk. "Why are you really here, Maya?" His voice was sharp, almost breaking. Was it all planned? Every late night, every word, every act of kindness, was it all revenge? Maya's eyes widened, pain flickering across her face. She reached for the file, but Adrian stopped her. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "It's true. My family suffered because of one of your deals. We lost everything." Her voice shook slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "But I did not come here for revenge." "Then why?" Adrian demanded. "Because I needed to understand," she whispered. "I needed to see the man behind the empire. The man who destroyed so many lives, including mine. I wanted to know if you were truly as heartless as they said." Her words cut deeper than any betrayal. Adrian felt exposed, stripped of the armor he had carried for years. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but no words came. Instead, silence fell again. Maya stood slowly, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "I did not come to destroy you, Adrian. I came to see if a man who built an empire without love could still have a heart. And now, I think I know the answer." Adrian's breath caught. For the first time in his life, he did not know whether his empire was collapsing, or whether it was finally beginning to live. The truth hung heavy in the air, like a blade suspended above Adrian's head. The file on his desk told the story of a man who had destroyed lives in pursuit of power. Maya's calm voice reminded him of the cost of his empire: families broken, dreams crushed, and scars left behind. Adrian had always believed his empire was his greatest strength. But now, sitting across from Maya, he wondered if it was his greatest mistake. For the first time, he felt shame, a feeling he had buried so deeply that he almost forgot it existed. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "So, you came here to judge me?" Maya shook her head gently. "No. I came to see if there was more to you than the man who ruined us. I needed to know if behind this empire, there was still a human being." Her words pierced his defenses. He wanted to argue, to remind her that the world was cruel, that survival required sacrifice. But the excuses felt hollow now. Looking into her steady eyes, he realized she was not seeking revenge. She was seeking truth. Adrian stood and walked to the window. The city stretched below him, glittering like it always did, but for the first time, he didn't see victory. He saw the weight of every deal, every ruthless choice. He saw the cost of the cold walls he had built. "Do you hate me?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. Maya was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I did. For a long time. But hate doesn't heal. I learned that holding on to it only keeps wounds open." She paused, her tone firm yet gentle. "I don't hate you anymore, Adrian. But I cannot forget, either." Her honesty was like a mirror, sharp, clear, unforgiving. Adrian turned back, his eyes filled with something his employees had never seen before: vulnerability. 4 days after that conversation, Adrian struggled. The empire continued to run smoothly, but inside, he was in chaos. Meetings blurred together, numbers lost meaning, and the silence of his penthouse grew unbearable. For the first time in years, he questioned not his business, but himself. And slowly, something began to change. The man who once treated employees as tools began to notice them as people. He saw their tired faces, their small struggles, their quiet dedication. He started asking questions, not about numbers but about lives. He surprised his staff with acts of fairness they never expected. Whispers spread through the company: the cold king was changing. And at the center of this change was Maya. She remained the same, calm, steady, honest. But her presence reminded Adrian that life was more than contracts and control. She did not push him, she did not demand anything. Yet, she became the quiet light that guided him out of the shadows he had lived in for so long. One evening, weeks later, Adrian asked her to join him in his office. He placed a document on the table. "This company once took everything from you," he said. "But I want to give something back. A scholarship fund. A program for families like yours, who lost because of me." Maya looked at the papers, then at him. Her eyes softened, but she said, "Adrian, rebuilding an empire is not about money. It's about heart." He nodded slowly, her words sinking deeper than any business advice he had ever received. In that moment, Adrian understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. Power without love was emptiness. His empire, though vast, had been hollow. But with love, even the smallest kind, it could be alive. Time passed, and the empire began to transform. Employees who once walked in fear now worked with pride. The man who never smiled was seen sharing quiet laughter in the halls. The empire that was once built on fear began to grow roots of trust. And in the heart of it all stood Adrian and Maya, 2 lives bound not by contracts or power, but by truth and forgiveness. He had built an empire without love. But one in turn changed his world. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole was not just a king of business, he was a man with a heart.